In a frozen morning in the wilds of Wyoming, a weary rider stumbled upon what he thought was a lifeless form buried in the snow, but it wasn't an animal. It was a woman, half frozen, eyes hollow. He chose to help her. What happened after would lead them both down a path soaked in silence, blood, and something close to love. Who was she really, and what was she running from? Harper Kane rode slowly through the cold, open land of Wyoming, the wind biting at his skin like tiny knives. Snow covered everything, endless white stretching to the edge of the world. He had seen too much, fought in wars he no longer believed in, and now wandered the land like a ghost, looking for something he couldn't name. His horse was tired, like him, but it kept walking through the storm. Harper's face was rough, his eyes quiet and deep. He had lost people. He had lost himself, maybe. The road gave him no peace, only distance. Then one afternoon, with the wind howling through the pines and the snow falling thick, he saw something strange, a shape half buried in the snow, still and silent. At first he thought it was an animal, maybe a deer fallen and frozen, but as he got closer, he saw it was a woman. Her skin was pale, bruises on her face, her lips almost blue. She looked broken, like someone who had fallen from the sky and never expected to land. But she was alive, barely. Her eyes opened as he knelt beside her. She didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't ask for help. She just looked at him. Her name, she later said, was Edda. That was all. No last name, no explanation, just Edda. Her voice was quiet, like someone who had not used it in a long time. Harper didn't ask many questions. He had long ago learned that people carried wounds deeper than what the eye could see. Some stories were too painful to tell. He lifted her gently, wrapped her in his coat, and placed her on his horse, holding her steady as they moved. They found a broken-down hunting hut deep in the woods, a roof barely hanging on, walls that creaked in the wind, but it was shelter. That night, the fire crackled weakly in the corner, while Harper sat across from her, watching the shadows dance on her face. Edda didn't speak. She just stared at the flames, her eyes flickering like candlelight. She looked like someone who had lost everything, yet still held on to some small thread inside her. Harper didn't speak much either. Silence filled the space between them, not empty, but full of things unspoken. Pain, fear, memories, regret. He gave her some jerky and melted snow for water. She ate slowly, as if unsure she was allowed to. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from something deeper. Trauma lived in her bones. Harper knew that kind of silence, the kind born from too much sorrow. He didn't try to fix her. He just sat there, letting the warmth of the fire and the quiet company do what words could not. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal, but inside, there was a kind of fragile peace. Harper thought about the things he had lost, his brother in the war, a wife who had waited too long for him to come back, a home that no longer felt like home. He saw something in Ada's eyes that reminded him of himself. Not just sadness, but strength. The strength it takes to survive when you no longer want to. That night, neither of them slept much. Harper stared at the roof, Ada at the fire. Their breathing matched, slow and steady, two broken people sharing the same air. In the morning, the snow had stopped. The trees outside were heavy with white, like ghosts frozen in place. Ada stepped outside for a moment, barefoot, feeling the snow under her skin. She didn't flinch. Harper watched her from the doorway, unsure if she would walk away, but she didn't. She came back in, said nothing, and sat beside the fire again. He handed her his gloves. She didn't thank him, but she wore them. There was something about her silence that was loud. Harper respected that. Some people needed to talk to heal, others just needed time, and warmth, and someone to sit beside them when the world became too much. Harper had not planned to find anyone. He had planned to keep riding until the land swallowed him whole. But now, with Ada beside him, something small shifted inside. Not hope, not yet, but something. The beginning of something. Maybe redemption, maybe understanding, maybe just the comfort of being seen. As the fire cracked, and the light flickered on the wall, Harper thought maybe the snow had not buried everything. Maybe it had uncovered something too. A stranger, yes, but maybe also a reason to stay for one more night. For now, that was enough. Harper and Ada didn't know where the road would take them next. But in the silence, in the snow, They had found each other, and for people like them, people running from pain, ghosts of their former selves, that meant everything. It wasn't a love story, not yet, maybe not ever. It was something older, deeper, harder to explain, a quiet bond between two souls who knew what it meant to suffer and still stand. The snow outside kept falling gently, but the storm inside them had begun to calm, and that was a start. Ada refuses to go to any town. She fears something or someone. Harper doesn't ask why. He understands. She's not running from the law, but from men who wear law like a mask. Over days, she slowly tells him her name. No past, no home, just Ada. Ada stayed close to the river. The sound of flowing water comforted her, like a voice that never judged, never asked questions. Harper watched her with quiet eyes, never pushing, just being there. Sometimes, at night, he'd hear her cry softly. She never sobbed, just let tears fall like rain no one could see. One evening, she told him about a place where the air smelled like honey, and the sky turned red at dusk. Her voice trembled. "I used to live there," she whispered. "But I can't go back. Not now. Maybe never." Harper nodded, not asking why. He knew that pain didn't always come with words. Some pain lived too deep. She kept a knife hidden in her boot, always, even when she slept. She said it was for safety, but Harper knew it was for memory too. Each morning, she walked to the edge of the trees and just stood there, staring into the distance. She was watching for something, or someone. She wouldn't say who. The world behind her eyes looked tired, not just from running, but from losing everything she once loved. Harper didn't tell her his story either. He just made the fire, caught fish, watched the sky with her in silence. Slowly, she let down pieces of the wall around her heart. Not all at once, just a crack here, a word there. She laughed once, just once. It was a small sound, barely there, but it made Harper smile. She told him she used to have a brother, a quiet boy with a wild laugh. She never said his name. One day she said, "Men came in uniforms, they spoke in loud voices, they called themselves protectors, but they brought fire and fear." That's when she ran. Since then she hadn't stayed in one place for more than a few days. Until now. With Harper, something felt almost safe. Not safe enough to sleep with both eyes closed, but safe enough to breathe without shaking. Ada carved little shapes into wood, stars, moons, tiny animals. She gave one to Harper, a small bird, wings wide open. "For your kindness," she said. Harper held it like it was made of glass. Days turned into weeks. Ada didn't say she was staying, but she didn't leave either. Sometimes, she'd wake up with a start, sweat on her brow, eyes wide with fear. Harper would hand her water, sit nearby, say nothing. One evening, as the sun set in orange and gold, she whispered, "If they find me, don't fight, just run." Harper didn't promise. He just nodded. In her sleep, she sometimes called out names. Names Harper didn't know. Maybe people from the Red Sky place. Maybe ghosts. She never talked about them when she woke. He didn't ask. She breathed slowly, deeply, learning each day how to be less afraid, how to live again. Harper never asked for more than she gave. He just stayed. And sometimes, that was enough. She breathed slowly, deeply, learning each day how to be less afraid, how to live again. Harper never asked for more than she gave. He just stayed. And sometimes, that was enough. She breathed slowly, deeply, learning each day how to be less afraid, how to live again. Harper never asked for more than she gave. He just stayed. And sometimes, that was enough. She breathed slowly, deeply, learning each day how to be less afraid, how to live again. Harper never asked for more than she gave. He just stayed. And sometimes, that was enough. She breathed slowly, deeply, learning each day how to be less afraid, how to live again. Harper never asked for more than she gave. He just stayed. And sometimes, that was enough. She breathed slowly, deeply, learning each day how to be less afraid, how to live again. Harper never asked for more than she gave. He just stayed. And sometimes, that was enough. She breathed slowly, deeply, learning each day how to be less afraid, how to live again. Harper never asked for more than she gave. He just stayed, and sometimes that was enough. She breathed slowly, deeply, learning each day how to be less afraid, how to live again. Harper never asked for more than she gave. He just stayed, and sometimes that was enough. She breathed slowly, deeply, learning each day how to be less afraid, how to live again. Harper never asked for more than she gave. He just stayed, and sometimes that was enough. She breathed slowly, deeply, learning each day how to be less afraid, how to live again. Harper never asked for more than she gave. He just stayed, and sometimes that was enough. Harper Kane had never been a man of many words, and that quiet nature served him well now. Ada screamed in her sleep again that night, a sound that tore through the cabin like a wounded animal. Her voice cracked on the edges of pain no one had asked about, and Harper, true to his ways, didn't. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He only listened. He lay on his cot near the fire, eyes open in the dark, waiting for her voice to go quiet. When the storm in her chest passed, she would lie still again, curled tight in the bed he'd built for her with his own hands, and her breathing would slow. Sometimes when the nightmares faded, she whispered things, half-formed thoughts, broken names, prayers with no beginning and no end. Harper didn't ask. He just listened, the way a mountain listens to wind. Day by day, a change started to grow between them. Small things. The way Ada folded his shirts when she washed them in the cold stream. The way Harper left her coffee by the window where she liked to sit in the morning light. Neither of them said thank you, but they noticed. One day Harper came back from chopping firewood to find Ada kneeling on the snow-covered ground, her hands cradling a hawk with a torn wing. Its eyes were wild, but it did not fight her. She looked up as Harper approached, her face pale and her lips trembling, but her hands were steady. "It fell," she said softly, "from the sky. I think it's dying." Harper crouched beside her, watching. "You gonna try to save it?" he asked. Ada nodded. "I can try," she whispered like the words were fragile. She brought the hawk into the cabin and cared for it. She fed it bits of rabbit and tucked warm cloths around it. She talked to it in low, gentle tones when she thought Harper wasn't listening. 3 days later, the hawk stopped breathing. Ada stood very still, her hands clenched at her sides. Harper saw the way her shoulders stiffened, how she blinked hard and fast. She didn't cry. She took the bird outside, wrapped it in flannel, and buried it beneath a pine tree not far from the cabin. Harper watched her from the porch, arms crossed, saying nothing. When she was done, she sat beside the grave, staring at the snow. The sky was grey, and flakes began to fall again, soft as ash. Harper walked out and sat beside her. After a long silence, Ada spoke. "I don't believe in God," she said. Her voice was even. "Not after everything, not after the things I've seen." She turned her face to him. "But maybe he believes in me." Harper didn't respond. He didn't know how. Instead, he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. Not too hard, not too soft, just enough to let her know he was there. She didn't shrug him off. They sat that way for a long time, the snow falling around them, covering the ground like forgiveness. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned. The hawk's spirit, if it had one, had flown, and Ada, though her hands were scarred, though her nights were haunted, had saved something. Even if it had died, she had tried. That counted. It mattered. The next day, Harper found Ada fixing the woodpile. Her sleeves were rolled up, and the scars on her arms caught the light, long white lines that told stories she would never speak. Harper didn't look away. She saw that he saw, but she didn't hide. Something wordless passed between them. Recognition maybe, or understanding. That night, she didn't scream, not once. Harper listened anyway, just in case. Morning came, cold and bright. Ada cooked breakfast, and they ate in silence. Not the empty silence of strangers, but the quiet company of two people who had suffered, who were still suffering, and who somehow had found each other in the middle of nowhere. Harper didn't know how long she would stay. He didn't ask. Ada didn't know where she was going next. She didn't say. But for now, they were here. And sometimes, just surviving together was enough. She began to clean things without being asked, polishing the old lantern, mending Harper's torn jacket, whittling broken chair legs back into shape. Her hands moved with the knowledge of someone who had learned to rebuild from ruins. She didn't talk much about herself, but she started humming while she worked, low and steady, the kind of sound a person makes when they don't realize they're being heard. Harper liked that sound. It filled the silence without disturbing it. At night, She sat by the fire, legs curled under her, staring into the flames. Harper often watched her from the corner of his eye, careful not to intrude. He still didn't ask questions. He'd learned that Ida's story came out in pieces, not in words but in actions, in quiet rituals. When she swept the floor 3 times, even when it was already clean. When she tied knots in bits of string and left them near the windows. When she set a single plate out on the porch once, before sunset, and waited a full hour before bringing it back in. Harper saw it all. He didn't understand, but he respected it. One evening, she turned to him and said, "I used to think being broken meant being useless." Her voice was calm, as if talking to the fire. "But broken things can be strong too, just in different ways." Harper nodded. "Yeah," he said, "like a tree that grows back crooked after a storm." She looked at him then, really looked. Exactly. There was a silence, not empty, just full of things neither of them had words for. In that silence, something softened between them. Trust, maybe, or the beginning of it. And in that cold Wyoming winter, trust was as good as warmth, as good as prayer. The moon was broken that night, half covered in smoke and clouds, as if the sky itself had been torn open by sorrow. The village they entered was more ash than earth, the air heavy with the smell of burned wood and old blood. The silence was thick but not peaceful, just hollow, as if something had once lived there and had screamed while dying. Ada stepped over the blackened remains of a wooden cart, her boots crunching on pieces of what might have been a family's life. Her eyes burned, not from the smoke but from memories. She whispered, more to herself than to Harper, "This country is a wound." Harper stood still behind her, looking at the same destruction, but he didn't flinch. He had seen it before, in other places, under different names. His voice was low and steady as he replied, "It's always been that way." Ada turned to look at him, not expecting comfort, but maybe just truth. The firelight flickered across Harper's face, making him look both young and ancient at the same time. He didn't try to touch her. He didn't say it would be okay. And maybe that was why she trusted him more in that moment than anyone else she had ever known. They made camp in the shell of what had once been someone's home. The roof was gone, the walls half burned, but it gave them shelter from the wind. Ada sat with her back to the stone fireplace, staring into the flickering light. Her hands were dirty, her coat torn, her face tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Harper didn't speak. He just sat near her, close enough to share warmth, far enough to give her space. But something shifted in the silence. Not suddenly, not like a storm, slowly, like snow melting on a quiet morning. Ada reached out, not from fear, not from needing protection, but because in that moment she just needed to know that he was real, that she wasn't alone in this burnt and broken world. Her fingers found his sleeve, and instead of pulling away, Harper let her touch stay. He didn't speak, but he turned his hand so it wrapped gently around hers, holding it like a promise. And it was a promise, even if the words hadn't been said yet. The fire popped softly, casting dancing shadows across the ruined walls. Harper finally broke the silence, his voice rough but clear. "Wherever your revenge takes you, I'll ride with you." Ada looked at him, and in his eyes she saw no pity, no fear, only a kind of quiet loyalty that felt heavier than blood. She didn't smile, but her grip on his hand tightened just a little. Outside, the wind howled like a ghost mourning its own name. Inside, 2 broken people sat side by side, no longer alone in their grief. Ada didn't speak, but she leaned her head gently against Harper's shoulder, and he didn't move. The war had taken everything from her, her family, her village, her sense of safety. But in this small moment, in the ashes of ruin, she had something again. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the beginning of something close. The fire burned low. Sleep didn't come easily, but it came, slow and heavy. Ada's dreams were dark, flashes of fire, screams, the cold edge of steel, but when she woke, Harper was still there, standing at the doorway with his back to her, watching the morning rise over the hills like a wounded sun. They didn't speak much that morning. Words felt too fragile, but they moved together, packed their few belongings, and rode out of the dead village, with wind in their coats and revenge in their hearts. They didn't look back. There was nothing left behind but ghosts and ashes. As they rode, the silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with something growing, slow trust, quiet understanding, the kind of bond that doesn't need explanation. Ada didn't know where the road would end. She only knew she wouldn't walk it alone. And Harper, for all his silence and shadows, had made a choice. Her war was his now. Her pain, her fight, her fury. He had taken it all as if it were his own. Not out of duty, but because something in her had called something in him, and he had answered without hesitation. The hills ahead were steep, the sky above was grey, and the danger behind them was not yet finished. But for now, they rode forward, together, and that was enough. They had ridden through cold silence and sunburnt plains, their horses quiet beneath them, and their hearts heavy with what waited ahead. Eda said little since they crossed into New Mexico territory, her eyes always searching, not for beauty or shelter, but for ghosts. Trinidad lay quiet in a shallow valley, gold dust blowing through its cracked streets, and Harper Kane could already smell the lies before they even reached the edge of town. The saloon stood like a wound in the earth, dark woods soaked in music and whiskey, but it was the name that made Eda stop. Judge Ransom's house, painted above the doors like a joke in bad taste. Harper didn't ask if she was sure. He never did. Her fingers brushed over the grip of the revolver at her hip, but she didn't draw it yet. "He used to make me call him Uncle," she said, voice soft like paper left out in the rain. "He told the other girls I was his favorite. That made them hate me, not him." She smiled, but it was a bitter thing, full of old bruises and burned letters. They waited until sundown, when the saloon's lamps cast yellow sickness across the street. Harper climbed to the roof of the trading post across the way, rifle cradled in his lap, watching shadows move through smoke and glass. Eda walked through the swinging doors, like she'd done it 1,000 times in her mind. Black dress, black gloves, hair pinned like a widow's. The pianist played a crooked tune. The men barely noticed her, until she stopped in the doorway, letting the silence find her. Ransom sat in the center like a toad on a throne, fatter than she remembered, with soft fingers and a pink mouth. When he saw her, he blinked like a man seeing a ghost he thought long buried. "Do you remember me?" she asked. Her voice didn't shake. "You used to call me your niece. You sold me like cattle. You said it wasn't personal." Ransom laughed, but it was nervous and high-pitched. "Girl, I don't remember half the things I've done. Don't come walking in here thinking." She didn't let him finish. She walked across the floor, past men who turned their heads and looked away. Ransom stood up, hand going for his belt, but her gun was already out. Harper didn't move. He watched through the rifle scope, not because he needed to protect her, but because he needed to see her do this. The pistol barked once. One shot, clean and cruel. The room screamed, but no one stopped her. She stood over him, eyes like storm glass. "I made him look me in the eye," she said, when she stepped outside, the wind pulling at her coat. Harper climbed down and met her in the alley, his face unreadable. "Was it enough?" he asked. She looked down at her hand, still shaking a little, and said, "Not yet. They didn't ride out immediately. She wanted to bury something. Not him. He was left to rot in the filth he made, but a part of herself. They found a dry hill behind the church, and dug a small grave. She took a ribbon from her pocket, the same one he once used to tie her hair like a doll. She placed it in the earth, and whispered something Harper couldn't hear. He didn't ask. The next morning, they rode out before the town could speak. Behind them, rumors would grow, twisted and loud, but it didn't matter. They were chasing truth, not approval. As they rode, Ada asked Harper to tell her a story. He told her one about a fox and a storm, something soft to wash away the blood. She didn't smile, but she listened. At camp that night, she asked him why he watched from the roof. "I needed to know if you'd stop," he said. "Why?" "Because I was afraid I wouldn't." She didn't say anything to that. She just took his hand. Her grip was warm, but there was a tremble underneath, like something still breaking. The fire crackled, coyotes sang in the dark, and the sky spilled stars like secrets. In the silence, she finally said, "I want to find the next one." Harper nodded. "We will." And though nothing in the world could give her back what had been taken, she felt for the first time in years, not whole, but awake. Awake with fire, with grief, with rage and memory, and a voice that had been silent too long, now shaping the path ahead. The list of 5 was no longer just names. They were destinations of pain. They were pieces of herself she had to reclaim, even if it meant burning the whole trail behind her. Harper understood this. That's why he didn't try to stop her. That's why he followed. In Trinidad, a man who called himself judge had died without mercy. In the wilderness ahead, 4 more waited, and so did something else, an ending not yet written, held in the hands of a woman reborn. After Trinidad, they say nothing for 2 whole days. No words pass between them. No explanations or apologies. Just silence that settles like a quiet blanket over their weary bodies and tired hearts. But unlike before, this silence no longer feels like an empty space filled with hurt or confusion. Instead, it becomes a place where they can just be, close without the need to fill the air with sounds or meanings, where the quiet itself speaks softly in ways words never could. They move slowly through the days, walking with careful steps over frozen ground and brittle leaves, their eyes often meeting and then looking away, as if afraid to break the fragile calm. The cold still bites, but there is warmth in the mere presence of the other, a subtle heat that grows beneath the surface, unnoticed yet steady like the slow pulse of a heartbeat beneath the skin. When the sun dips low, they find themselves beside a river hollow, a place where the water runs gentle and clear, reflecting the grey sky and the bare branches that reach out like fragile hands. The hollow feels like a secret kept by the earth itself, a quiet refuge away from the rushing world, where time seems to slow and the noises of worry and pain fade into something softer and calmer. That night, under a sky brushed with the faintest stars, she comes to him. There are no words, no whispered promises, no declarations or demands, only the simple act of coming close, of stepping quietly into the space he makes with his steady breathing and open arms. In the dark, their bodies find each other like 2 stones shaped by the river, smooth and fitting, steady and familiar. Breath mingles with breath, warm and alive against the chill that surrounds them, and fingers trace the edges of faces and hands, without hurry or fear. The night holds them gently, like a mother cradling a child, a silent witness to the quiet language of love that needs no translation. She leans in, not seeking answers or explanations, but simply wanting to be near, to share the unspoken comfort of presence and touch. They lie side by side, the soft rhythm of their breathing blending into the night stillness, creating a quiet song that only they can hear. It is in this silent communion that something deep and true begins to root itself, growing slowly beneath the surface, beyond the reach of words or reason. The river's steady flow outside the hollow reminds them that life moves forward, even when moments feel suspended in time. The chill of the night is no longer a threat, but a reminder of how precious warmth is, warmth shared in silence, in breath, in the small kindness of being close when the world feels cold and uncertain. Love, they realize, does not always need to be spoken or explained. Sometimes, it is simply the quiet company of another soul, the gentle touch that says, "I am here," when no other words can. And in that hollow by the river, wrapped in shadows and soft light, they find a new kind of hope, fragile, delicate, yet unbreakable in its quiet strength. As the night deepens, the stars blink faintly through the thin clouds, witnessing their closeness, the unspoken promise held in a shared breath, the beginning of healing, and the slow, steady unfolding of something beyond pain. They are 2 souls tethered not by words, but by the invisible thread of warmth and trust, learning that sometimes love is just the simple act of being there, without demands or expectations, only the quiet assurance that in this vast and uncertain world they have found a place to rest. The cold morning comes, but neither moves to speak. The silence remains, but it is no longer heavy or harsh. It is the space where understanding grows, where hearts begin to mend slowly, carefully, and where the future holds the possibility of something gentle and true. Together, they watch the river move steadily onward, its song a soft, endless whisper that carries the hope of new beginnings, spoken not in words but in the tender stillness of a shared night. And so, beyond words, beyond the pain of what was, beyond the fear of what might be, they lie side by side, letting the quiet speak for them, letting love live quietly in the spaces between breaths, knowing that sometimes silence is the truest language of all. In the vast dry expanse of Utah, beneath the harsh sun and open sky, Harper and Ada moved with quiet determination, their steps slow but certain, their hearts heavy with a mixture of fear, anger, and a fragile hope that something could finally end the long nightmare they had both lived through. They had traveled far and wide, running from memories, from men who had hurt them, from the weight of pain they carried like invisible chains. But now, they were close, so close to the first man who had broken Ada's spirit, the man who had changed her world forever. Brodry. Harper watched her silently, sensing the storm raging inside Ada's soul, knowing this moment was not just about survival, but about reclaiming a part of herself stolen so long ago. The dry wind whispered through the cracked earth as they followed faint trails and shadows, their breaths shallow, each step echoing with the ghosts of a past that refused to fade. When they found Brodry, he was careless and cruel, unaware that the woman he had hurt so deeply was standing just feet away, stronger than he ever imagined. Ada's hands shook, her mind a whirlwind of pain and resolve, memories flooding her like an unstoppable tide. But Harper's steady gaze never wavered. Without hesitation, without looking back, Ada took her chance. Up close, face to face with the man who had haunted her dreams, she ended the threat that had loomed over her life for so long. As the moment passed, a silence deeper than any words filled the air, and Ada's body betrayed her. She began to shake, the walls she had built around her heart crumbling all at once. Harper moved to her side without a question, wrapping her arms around Ada, offering comfort, not with empty words but with the quiet strength of presence. There were no judgments, no demands, only a shared understanding that they were no longer just running from the past. They were holding on to each other, their pain intertwined and unspoken, a bond forged in fire and sorrow. As Ada wept, letting go of years of fear and pain, Harper held her like the only lifeline left in a world that had tried to drown them both. Together, in that barren Utah landscape, they found something rare and precious, hope born not from forgetting the wounds, but from facing them side by side, knowing that no matter what came next, they would carry each other through the darkness. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple, and in that fading light, two women stood strong, bound by scars and silence, but also by a fierce love that neither could fully name, yet could never deny. The cold Montana night settled over the small town with a quiet stillness that felt almost sacred, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. Harper and Ada stood side by side at the edge of the cracked pavement, staring up at the modest house where Fletcher Bain lived, a man who wore respect like a mask, but hid darkness behind his eyes. Darkness that had swallowed the innocence of children too many times, including some Ada had once tried to protect. Fletcher was a freight man, known by many as reliable and steady, a fixture in the community who had earned trust through years of hard work. But Ada knew the truth, the terrible truth no one dared to speak aloud. Fletcher was a predator, a man who had hurt children in ways that left scars deeper than anyone could see. Years ago, Ada had crossed paths with him, tried to stop him, but the law had failed her and the children he had destroyed. Tonight, there was no law that could help. Tonight, justice would come from Eda's hands alone. The air was crisp and cold as she stepped forward, her breath visible in the chilly night, her heart heavy but steady. There was no anger in her eyes, no hatred in her voice, just a quiet resolve as she slipped into the house, a shadow moving with purpose through dim halls and worn furniture that smelled of dust and regret. Fletcher sat unaware, an old man now, with lines of time etched into his face, still confident in his untouchable place in the world. Ada spoke to him softly, her voice calm but firm, words that carried the weight of every child who had suffered because of him. No dramatic confrontation, no cries for mercy, just the swift, clean end to a life that had caused so much pain. When it was done, Ada didn't celebrate or feel relief. Instead, a deep sorrow settled over her, a sorrow she kept locked away, refusing to let her tears fall. She wiped her hands carefully, blood dark and cold against her skin, a silent testament to the price of justice. Outside, Harper waited with a quiet patience, the cool Montana wind tugging at his coat. When she returned, her eyes told stories she refused to say out loud, stories of pain, loss and the heavy cost of what had to be done. Harper reached out, took her hand in his, fingers tightening gently as if to say, "I am here, even when the world feels too dark." She let herself lean into that small comfort, the warmth of his hand grounding her, reminding her that she was not alone. They stood together under the blanket of stars, silent companions in a night that felt both endless and full of fragile hope. Ada's mind wandered back to the faces of the children she had tried to save, to the fear she had seen in their eyes, to the promises she had made to herself that no one would hurt them again on her watch. And though the weight of that promise pressed down hard, she felt, for the first time in a long time, a sliver of peace, knowing that at least one shadow had been pushed back. Harper squeezed her hand, a quiet vow between them, that no matter how dark the road, they would walk it together, sharing the burdens too heavy to carry alone. The world around them was cold and indifferent, but here, in the silence between heartbeats and whispered breaths, two souls held on to each other, to justice, and to the hope that even in the darkest places, light could be found. And so, with blood on her hands and tears she refused to cry, Ada stood by Harper, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that sometimes justice was quiet, and sometimes it came with a price. The cold wind cut through the thin walls of the small church where she found him at last. The man who once called himself her father, now a preacher, wrapped in the robes of false holiness, standing behind the pulpit, with eyes that had once looked away when she needed him most. She remembered the nights filled with darkness, the days lost to fear, and the moment he sold her to pay off his debts, trading her like a thing, like something with no heart or soul, a price marked in coins that never bought her safety or love. He had been the first man to betray her, the one whose hands should have protected, but instead had pushed her into the cold world alone, a world that tried to bury her under shame and pain. Yet here she was, standing before him, not as a broken child, but as a woman who had climbed out of the grave he tried to dig for her. She saw the years in his eyes, regret maybe, or just fear, but she no longer felt the weight of his judgment. Her voice was steady, but heavy with the years of silence and sorrow, when she said, "You tried to bury me, Father, but I climbed out." His mouth opened, but no words came, because he knew this time it was not about forgiveness or understanding. It was about truth, a truth he had never dared face. She walked slowly down the aisle, the wooden floor creaking under her steps, the echoes of her past ringing louder than his prayers. Every step was a memory, every breath a moment reclaimed. The preacher who had once sold her out now looked small and fragile, a man who had built his faith on lies and now had nowhere to hide. She told him about the nights she had spent cold and afraid, the hands that had hurt her when his should have held her safe, the dreams stolen, the childhood lost. The congregation watched in silence, some with tears, some with shock, as she laid bare the wounds he had caused. She spoke not to shame him, but to free herself. When the time came, she did not hesitate. This was not a murder born of rage, but a reckoning, a final act of justice she had long deserved. The knife was steady in her hand, a symbol of all the pain she carried, and with one motion, it was over. She did not feel the weight of guilt, only the lightness of truth released. Her father's body lay still, but in her heart, a new life stirred. The past no longer chained her, and the future, though uncertain, was hers to shape. Walking away from the church, the wind no longer bit at her skin. It carried the whispers of hope, the promise that this was not the end, but a beginning. She would rebuild, find peace, and finally be free from the shadows he cast. This was her moment. Darkness behind, light ahead. Her journey was far from over, but now for the first time, she felt ready to face it, strong and unbroken. The preacher was dead, but the woman he tried to bury was alive and rising, and nothing could stop her now. They stopped running, finally, when the sharp bite of the cold mountain air no longer chased them, but welcomed them instead. The long, exhausting flight from everything broken in their past came to an end at the edge of the world, where pine trees reached up to touch the sky, and the snow lay thick like a soft blanket on the ground. Harper and Ida looked at each other, breath heavy from cold and effort, and knew deep inside that this was the place to start again. With hands that had trembled from fear, now steady with quiet resolve, they built a small cabin from fallen logs and stones, a home that grew with each nail hammered and each plank set in place. The mountains watched silently as they planted seeds in frozen soil, learning slowly how to coax life from the earth even when it seemed impossible. Sometimes the wind carried their laughter, soft and light, across the snowfields, breaking the long silence that had filled their days before. Harper read old books aloud by the fire, his voice steady and warm, stories from another time that seemed distant but somehow healing, while Ada listened, feeling the words stitch small pieces of her heart back together. They hunted carefully, taking only what they needed, learning again to trust the rhythm of nature, to live with respect and gratitude. Day by day the mountain air cleaned away the bitterness and fear that had clung to them like shadows, and peace began to grow in the spaces between their quiet moments. Their lives were simple, cold mornings warmed by shared blankets, long evenings by the crackling fire, hands finding each other in the dark when the loneliness threatened to creep back in. The scars from their past were still there, faint but unyielding reminders, but they did not define them anymore. They were building something fragile and new, a place where love could grow in silence and small gestures, where the past did not demand to be heard every moment. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the snow gold, Harper's voice broke the calm, soft and steady like a whisper carried on the wind. "I love you," he said, his eyes searching hers with the weight of all the days they had survived. And she answered, just as softly, "I know." There was no need for more. Those two words held all the courage and hope they had found in this new life. It was enough to hold on to when the cold nights came, enough to bring warmth to the dawn, enough to remind them that even in the hardest places, love could take root and bloom. They did not promise forever. That word was too big, too heavy for their battered hearts. But they promised to keep building peace together, one small day at a time. Each morning they woke with the sun, shared a quiet breath and faced the mountain, the snow and each other, choosing hope over fear, light over shadow. In those simple acts they found their freedom. The mountains did not ask for perfection, only for patience, and they learned to be patient with themselves and each other. In the evenings they would sit close, fingers entwined, listening to the wind as it whispered through the trees, carrying stories of survival and new beginnings. The cabin, with its creaking walls and warm hearth, became a symbol of their journey, a place where wounds could heal and love could grow slowly, without rush or demand. And sometimes, when the stars spilled across the night sky like scattered diamonds, they would dream quietly of the future, a future made bright, not by grand plans, but by the simple certainty of being together, safe and at peace. Harper's voice, reading from a weathered book by the fire, filled the room with soft light and hope, while Eda's laughter, light and rare, was the music that kept the cold at bay. They learned to listen to each other again, to hear the unspoken words beneath the silence, to hold space for pain and joy alike. It was not an easy path, healing never is, but with each day, they built a life where fear could no longer chase them, where love did not demand but simply was. And in that quiet company, in that shared stillness, they found the courage to believe again, in themselves, in each other, and in the fragile, beautiful promise of starting over. Their story was no longer about running away, but about coming home to a place not on any map but in the heart. And that place, born from the ashes of everything lost, was enough. It held all they needed. It held their new beginning. The quiet that had settled over the land was fragile, like a thin layer of ice on a dark, rushing river, and everyone knew it would not hold for long. Harper and Eda had found moments of calm between the endless chase and battles, but trouble never sleeps, and soon the shadows lengthened again, bringing with them a chill sharper than the winter air that blanketed Wyoming in snow. It started with distant sounds, whispers of movement in the frozen woods, the faint crunch of boots on frost-hardened ground. The bounty hunters had come back, but this time they were different, smarter, colder, more ruthless. They moved like ghosts, slipping through the silent trees with practiced ease, their eyes hard and unforgiving, their minds set on one goal, capture or kill Harper Kane. Harper sensed it before the attack, the way the wind shifted, carrying with it the smell of smoke and menace. He tried to prepare, but even with his experience and sharp instincts, the sudden onslaught overwhelmed him. The fight was brutal, raw, desperate, a clash not just of strength but of will and survival. The bounty hunters fought with precision and cruelty, their weapons cutting through the air like hungry wolves. Harper fought back fiercely, but a cold burning pain erupted in his side, sharp and unforgiving. He stumbled, his breath ragged, blood warming the snow beneath him, staining the white world a dark, cruel red. Ada was there in an instant, her eyes wide with fear and determination. She pulled Harper close, her hands shaking as she pressed her coat against his wound, trying to stem the flow, but the cold was cruel, and Harper's skin was pale against the fading light. "I can't lose you," she whispered, her voice breaking like thin ice beneath a heavy weight. There was no room for weakness here, yet her words carried all the pain and hope she had buried deep inside. Harper looked into her eyes, the fire of his spirit still burning even as his body faltered. "You won't," he promised, his voice low but certain, a vow stronger than any steel. The snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering the blood, hiding the scars of the battle, as if the earth itself wanted to forget the violence. They moved away from the place where the fight had taken its toll, leaving behind the smell of smoke and gunpowder. Together they built a fire, the flames licking upward into the cold night sky, and they burned what remained of the past, the clothes torn in battle, the scraps of old letters, the memories too painful to hold. The fire was a shield and a farewell, a promise to each other that no matter how hard the world tried to tear them apart, they would rise again. Ada wrapped her arms around Harper, feeling the faint warmth of life still pulsing beneath his skin. The quiet snow fell softly, a blanket of white over a land scarred by violence and love, loss and hope. They were two souls bound by fate, holding tight in a world that never let them rest, but in that fragile moment by the fire, they found a peace worth fighting for, and though the night was dark and full of shadows, they knew deep inside that their fight was not over. Trouble never sleeps, but neither would they. Harper's breath grew steadier, and Ada's heart beat with fierce determination. Together, they faced the endless cold and the hunters that stalked them, their spirits entwined like the endless snowflakes that danced down from the sky, each one a silent promise of survival, love and the strength to keep moving forward no matter what storms came. The past could be burned and buried, but the future, uncertain and wild, was theirs to claim together. Ada looked out over the small patch of earth they had cleared together. The soil turned dark and rich beneath their hands. For so long, her heart had been a storm of anger and pain, a wild fire that burned everything it touched, leaving nothing but ash in its wake. She remembered the nights when the cold seemed sharper, when the silence between her and Harper felt like a chasm too wide to cross. But now, the silence was different. It was softer, full of the quiet hope that maybe they could find something better than what they had known before. One morning, as the sun rose over the distant mountains, casting long golden fingers across their little farm, Ada turned to Harper and said quietly, "I wanted revenge. I thought it would make the pain stop. But now, I want peace. I just don't know how to live in it." Her voice was rough from years of holding back tears and shouting at the sky, but there was a strange calm in her eyes, a new kind of courage. Harper looked at her with a gentle smile, his eyes warm with understanding. "We'll learn," he said softly, reaching for her hand and holding it steady. And so they did. Day by day, they learned to live not just side by side, but together. They planted rows of corn and beans, feeling the rough texture of soil beneath their nails, the small miracles of green shoots pushing up toward the sun. They built fences to keep out wild animals, and fixed the roof when the winter storms came early and fierce. They grew older, their hair touched by silver, their faces lined with the story of survival and quiet strength. They buried the dog they loved, the one who had been with them through the hardest nights, laying it beneath a small oak tree that they planted with care, a living memory for the loyal friend who had given them comfort without words. One morning, as the wind whispered softly through the leaves, Ada hummed a song, a simple melody from her childhood, one she hadn't sung in years, maybe even decades. Harper heard it and stopped what he was doing, a slow smile spreading across his face. The song was small, fragile, like a bird just learning to fly again, but it was a start. They were surviving. Finally, they were surviving, together. There were still hard days, days when grief came rushing back like a flood, when the past knocked loudly at the door of their hearts. But each time, they held on to the hope that peace was something they could build, not just something they waited for. Their farm was no longer just a place to live, it was a place to heal. It was a place where they could dream of a future that wasn't ruled by fear or anger. The seasons changed, bringing the bright green of spring, the blazing heat of summer, the soft gold of autumn, and the quiet hush of winter. With each season they grew stronger, not just in body but in spirit. Ada's hands, once trembling with sorrow, became steady and sure. Harper's smile, once rare and cautious, grew wide and warm. They shared stories in the evenings, laughter mingling with the crackle of the fire. Sometimes they spoke of the past, but more often they spoke of the future, of the small things they wanted to do, the places they wanted to see, the moments they wanted to share. And in that sharing they found a new kind of love, not the wild, reckless passion of youth, but the steady, deep bond forged through trials and quiet understanding. Peace was not a destination but a journey, and together they took each step, learning how to breathe again without fear, how to open their hearts without trembling. Edda's voice, once filled with bitterness, now carried a softness that touched Harper's soul. He held her close one evening as the stars blinked awake overhead, and whispered, "We're here, we made it." And in that moment they both knew that peace wasn't about forgetting, but about choosing to live beyond the pain. They had found a way to keep walking, hand in hand, into whatever came next. Their story was no longer about revenge or loss. It was about hope, survival, and the quiet, powerful strength of two souls, learning to live in peace together. No more bounty men come. The cold fear that once chased Harper and Ada like shadows in the snow has finally faded into the quiet of distant memories, replaced now by a calm that feels both strange and new. The hard days when every step outside could mean danger, when every whisper might carry threats, have passed like the long winter that once gripped the land. They are no longer running from ghosts of the past. The wounds inside them still ache sometimes, but those aches are soft, gentle reminders of a life that was harsh and wild, a life they survived together. Their love is no longer young, full of fiery passion and restless impatience. It has grown deep and steady, rooted in the soil of trust and shared pain. It is not easy because nothing that matters ever is, but it is true and strong. Harper watches Eddie standing in the river one afternoon, her feet in the cool water, sunlight catching the strands of her hair, making them glow like gold in the breeze. She looks peaceful, calm, the kind of peace that seemed impossible in the past, yet now she wears it like a second skin. Harper's heart fills with something fierce and gentle all at once, a quiet power that only comes from knowing you have someone who sees you, who stays with you no matter what. He steps forward slowly, not wanting to break the fragile magic of the moment, and says again the words she needs to hear, words he has spoken many times, but that still hold weight, still carry the truth that has saved them both so many times. "I love you." Eddie turns to him, her eyes reflecting the sunlight and the soft blue of the sky, and answers simply, "I know." In that single exchange, in the calm and quiet of the river, they find freedom. Freedom not from the past, which will always be a part of them, but freedom from its power over their lives. They do not need to fight or run anymore. The story they have lived through, full of pain and fear, hope and fierce survival, lives in their hearts but no longer controls their steps. They walk back from the river together, hand in hand, feeling the earth beneath their boots and the weight of the world lifting slowly off their shoulders. They have learned to forgive, not just each other, but themselves, for the mistakes and losses, the moments of weakness, and the times they thought they could not go on. The past will always be a chapter in their lives, but it is not the whole book. Their future is unwritten, open and vast like the wide Wyoming sky stretching above them. They know there will be hard days ahead, there always are, but now they face them side by side, with a love that has been tested and has endured. No more bounty men come, no more threats to their safety or peace. The small cabin they share is filled with warmth and light, the fire crackling in the hearth, stories and laughter weaving into the quiet nights. Harper sometimes looks at Edda and sees the girl he met in the snow, but also the woman she has become, the fierce, brave soul who refused to be broken. Edda looks at Harper and sees not just a protector or a fighter, but a partner, a man who loves her not because she is perfect, but because she is real, whole, and unafraid to stand with him against the world. Their days are slower now, filled with simple joys, walking through the fields, tending a small garden, watching the sun set over the mountains. They talk about dreams once too wild to speak aloud, now seeds planted carefully in the soft soil of hope. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Harper reads aloud from old books they found in town, stories of people who fought for a better life, stories that remind them that even when the past is heavy, the future can hold light. The seasons turn, and with each one, they grow stronger together, their bond like the roots of an ancient tree, holding firm even when the storms come. One day, as the river flows gently by their home, Harper takes Eda's hand, and they stand side by side, watching the water carry away fallen leaves and broken branches, knowing that their own story will live on like that river, sometimes calm, sometimes wild, but always moving forward. The past is over, Harper whispers, but the story lives. Ida smiles, squeezing his hand, and in that smile is the promise of tomorrow, the courage to face whatever comes next. Together, they are free, and as the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky with colors that seem made just for them, they know that freedom is not just a place, but a feeling, a place where love is stronger than fear, where hope is louder than doubt, and where two souls can finally rest, at peace with what was, and ready for all that is yet to be.